Ahoy! Today we're talking about healing, healer performance, and anti-heal. With Season 8, various anti-heal and healing items were adjusted, and we received a new mechanic called Not Brawling. We're gonna look into what impact this mechanic had on different guards and how these changes overall affect SMITE, healing, and anti-heal as a whole. And speaking of changes, here's somebody who wants you to change something else. Today's video is sponsored by Opera GX. Fun fact, I actually used the original Opera browser way back in my teens, since it was the first browser to support tabs. Could you imagine browsing without tabs nowadays? Opera GX, however, want to innovate in a new way. It's a gaming browser. Sounds weird? It'll make sense in a second. Most of you are probably familiar with the memes about Chrome eating RAM. That usually means you have to close your browser when gaming in order to not have performance cuts from that. However, that's not necessary with Opera GX. It has a built-in tool called GX Control that allows you to adjust and limit your browser's RAM and CPU usage. So when it's gaming time, you can just flick a switch and turn that usage all the way down. You can also limit the network bandwidth usage for things like streaming or downloads, or kill off tabs that use too many resources. Another feature that really sold me on the browser is the GX Corner. Here you can find a calendar with upcoming games, as well as a list of free games, and all of that is adjustable to your platform. There are also gaming news and tons more interesting game-related stuff. You also have integrations for Twitch and Discord right in your browser. I especially like the Twitch integration, which comes with a panel that shows you which of the streamers you follow are online and what they're streaming. In addition to that, you can also integrate other messengers, for example WhatsApp or Twitter. You can also customize the browser in your favorite colors at the click of a button. I really like the orange and cyberpunk theme. Today I'm also going to answer a commonly asked question: how do you get a heart from Duke? Easy. Click the tracking link down in the description and download the browser, and then respond in a comment with #installgx. If you do that within the next 48 hours, you'll get a heart from me. Huge thanks to Opera GX for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into today's topic. The Brawling Effect that was introduced in patch 8.1 makes it so that while not brawling, your ability and lifesteal healing is reduced by 30%, meaning as long as you're not fighting other guards, it's reduced by that. This means that while laning, you have to constantly look for fights, and around team fights, you will have to actively stay engaged with the enemy team to achieve the full healing effect. If you're healing outside of that area, back off a little bit, you'll get less healing. In the same breath, anti-heal items were nerfed as well and healing items were changed. We'll look at that in detail a little bit later. First, let's look at the guards and how it impacted them. Much of the initial perception was actually that it might hurt healers significantly, since they would just heal less throughout a match, and I was among the people who thought that this would hurt healers at least a little bit. So did that turn out to be the reality? In order to answer that, let's look at guards in Ranked Conquest and their performance specifically in Platinum and above, because that is the level of play where you can expect most players to reliably build anti-heal as well. Sure, many people do it below that level as well, but if you play below that level, you know that sometimes you will just have teammates that don't end up building anti-heal in situations where it's necessary. The first goddess to look at here is Aphrodite. She actually went up in win rate by 3% and is the second highest win rate in Conquest right now, with the first one being the goddess who shall not be named, who technically has some healing as well. If you look at Aphrodite's other stats here, we can actually see that they've gone down a little bit. Her pick and ban rate are slightly lower, her self-healing is down by 1100 and her healing is down by 1700 roughly. So there were some slight shifts here, but nothing that would impact her overall performance, and you have to keep in mind that other factors like shorter matches come into play here as well, and the general meta shifts that may skew some of these stats. If we look at her win rate across all levels of play, ignoring Bronze and Grandmasters because of the sample size, we can see that she's very well positioned with well above 50% win rate and very high ban rates at high levels of play as well. To draw a more conclusive picture, let's look at some more mage healers. If we look at Changa, we can also see that her stats are going down ever so slightly, but her win rate actually went up a little bit by 0.71%. So just very minor fluctuations with a higher ban rate in her case. As we can also see, her healing is reduced by similar amounts as Aphrodite's, with both her self-heal and healing going down more than 1000. Her win and ban rate again also paints a very similar picture, very much above 50% win rate and also higher ban rates the higher you go in level of play. The next one on the list is Hell, and we see a familiar picture here. Red colors everywhere, but her win rate is actually going up. It seems that even though the overall healing that we see is lower, the necessary healing in order to win games seems to be higher. And this makes sense when you consider that anti-heal items have been nerfed, which means that your in-combat healing is effectively higher. So maybe you will see these healers back a little bit more often since they can't sustain as well in lane, but then the healing in fights ends up being higher and therefore winning the fights. Hell's win rate shifts a little bit differently and increases more the higher you go in terms of level of play, but that also makes sense because she is harder to play than Aphrodite or Changa. And that brings us to the last archetypical mage healer, which paints a very different picture. That's Ra. If we're looking at Ra, his stats are actually going down quite drastically. His healing itself changes in a similar way to the other healers, with around 1000 to 1600 minus here, but he lost 71 spots in terms of win rate, even though the win rate itself only went down by 2.67%. He's still above 50% win rate, so he's still not a bad god, he's just not doing as well as the others here. It is however worth pointing out that Ra received nerfs in patch 7.12 that targeted the protections and power provided by his heal, and then also received nerfs to his movement speed in Season 8. So his win rate dropping isn't necessarily a result of the healing changes alone. They do impact him more than others though, because his healing in general even before this was lower than most other healers, and that's especially noticeable now because Ra is simply more of an out-of-combat healer than the others. He can drop down his heal in the middle of combat, but that often puts your allies at risk of being attacked while being in that area because it's relatively easy to target. So generally what you want to do with Ra is back out of the fight, place the heal somewhere in the back, have everyone heal up and go back in. For that type of healer I expected the brawling changes to have the most drastic impact, and that seems to be the case here. But especially Aphrodite and Changa don't really care about this as much since they typically are using their healing abilities to damage at the same time, so they get the not brawling effect anyways. For mage healers, what's also worth pointing out is that there were some item changes that benefit them as well. Rod of Tahuti has a pretty consistently high win rate across these mages, and that got changes that buffed it and make it more of a worthwhile early pickup. And Rod of Tahuti will always allow you to increase your healing when your allies are low. In addition to that, Spear of Desolation is picked up on Changa, for example, which also got buffs, reducing the cooldowns further, giving her more impact that way. And the same is the case for Hell as well. Because of that, I also wanted to see how healers that are not in this category perform in comparison. So the first one to look at here would obviously be Guan Yu. Guan Yu as a physical healer doesn't utilize the same items. That doesn't seem to be a major issue either though. If you look at his win rate, it actually increased slightly by 0.67%, even though his spot in terms of win rates is now down to spot number 5 from number 3, so not really a major loss anyways. While his stats are also all lower, again I think this also is affected by the new map and the meta and everything, we can see that his healing is actually not decreased by much. His self-heal is only decreased by 700 and his team healing is only decreased by 384, the lowest value we have here so far. So obviously he is in a very good spot, and that also coincides with the fact that he is someone who really wants to be in combat in the first place, so it makes sense for him to benefit from anything that reduces in-combat anti-heal. Again, his stats look very good across all ranks as well, and in his case we can also see that Caduceus' shield is an extremely effective item with a 61% win rate, so while he doesn't benefit from the other items, he still has his own, and in my opinion Caduceus' shield is still one of the strongest items we have out there anyways. Then we also have Guardian healers. The first one to look at here is Sylvanas, who actually took a little bit of a hit with an 0.71% win rate loss, so really nothing major again. So most certainly still a well-performing guard overall with roughly 54% win rate, and he also is actually the first one here to increase his self-heal with this patch. I would think this could be just a minor fluctuation, but it still looks interesting compared to all the others with 119 extra heal. Then again, Sylvanas is also someone who will often heal while he is in combat, where his allies may not necessarily be in combat at the same time if they are basically further away in lane and he is poking the enemy with the 2 while affecting his ally with the heal as well. The ally may not necessarily be in the brawling status. When it comes to his team healing, however, we see the same reduction as with everyone else really. While his win rate drops off in Master, this is because he only has a total of 15 games played there. While I wouldn't fully count her as a healer because she will always be brawling when she heals, Artio actually is in a very similar spot as Sylvanas, by the way, with a similar win rate. Another god that I quickly wanted to look at is Yamoch. And with Yamoch we can see a similar picture to Sylvanas, where her win rate actually went up slightly, but she will always be a low win rate guard in ranked because she's just hard to play. But we see her self-heal going up by 781. The team healing, however, again, stays lower. So now that we have the stats, what do we learn from that? From what we can tell so far, healers in general are not drastically affected by these changes. Many of them drop down in healing a little bit, but come out with a better win rate overall. The ones that seem to come out best out of it are the ones that don't really care about the not brawling status because they get a lot of their healing while in a fight. And this again matches what we see with the Antiheal item changes. We saw nerfs to almost all of them. We saw 5% reduction on Divine Ruin, as well as Brawler's Beatstick, the total healing of Toxic Blade, Pestilence and Contagion. That means that Toxic Blade, for example, can actually temporarily increase the enemy's healing. Of course, you damage them first, so it might even out from that, but if they had a lot of protections, you could effectively help someone heal more, because a single hit of Toxic Blade will only put it to 17.5% anti-heal, whereas normally they'd have 30%, which in my opinion makes Toxic Blade the worst anti-heal item out there at this point. Simultaneously, the duration of the non-aura anti-heal items was reduced by 2 seconds, from 8 seconds to 6 seconds, and Cursed Ankh, which is especially strong counter to healers, was even nerfed from 10 seconds to 6 seconds, while also reducing the anti-heal from 50% to 45% when this is already a very situational relic. You have to upgrade it now to even get 8 seconds duration. So overall I would say the fact that not brawling was introduced is overshadowed by the anti-heal nerfs that were made in the process that make it very hard to achieve consistent high anti-heal values on a target. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't build anti-heal, and it's still built plenty, but it just feels less rewarding to do so. It also at times feels less rewarding to poke healers, since they will just heal up for more if you do that. It's hard to say how impactful the healing item changes were in all of this, since especially Rod of Asclepius isn't that popular at the moment, but especially Cat Shield still seems to be doing its job. Now if you look at the other side of things to see if anti-heal guards benefit from these changes by still being able to consistently apply high anti-heal amounts, then we get a very inconsistent picture. We get a guard like Sobek that drastically increased in win rate, but it's also someone who's performing better in support especially. Then you have someone like Apuash who's slightly changed in win rate but is barely played in the first place. Then you have Osiris who drastically went up in win rate, but it probably doesn't have all too much to do with his anti-heal, because he benefits a ton from the new item changes for solo. And then you have Saket who dropped down even further in win rate, which was probably not because of this either, but rather because the new jungle starters don't really work very well for her. So we don't really get any conclusive impact out of this, and I would say overall the healing changes were not really a success in terms of toning down healers as the dominant force at Conquest, and they remain there. I would not be surprised if we see at least partial reverts to the anti-heal nerfs in the future. And with that, thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring this video. You'd help me out a lot if you download it through the link down below. And if you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button and maybe the bell to stay updated for other SMITE related content. We have a lot of interesting stuff for meta changes for various roles and items coming up very soon. I hope to see you for the next one soon. Duke Sloth, out.